Hi there, I'm Kiva Stratton and welcome to Culture Snap. Today on the show, we've got one of Australia's rising stars of the art world, Berny Bacic. Having spent decades building a highly sought-after graphic design practice, Berny has returned to her true calling, design art, where her paintings, textiles and applied art have become sought after by hotels and collectors from Sydney to New York. Recently featured in Frankie magazine, Berny's geometric designs and layered colours bring to life the glamour of mid-century design, infused with a modern aesthetic. Here we talk about her journey from the commercial world to the art world, how her cultural roots influence her work, and how she believes she needed a few decades to really develop her unique art language. I hope you enjoy. Berny Bacic, welcome to Culture Snap.
Thank you, Kiva. It's so lovely to be here.
I am absolutely thrilled to have you on this show because, Berny, you and I have known each other for some time. So I've been able to witness a little bit of your journey. When I first met you, you were just the most incredible, and still are, I should say, graphic designer. And you and I have worked on many brand projects together where I've kind of done the strategy and you've done that beautiful visual articulation. But I think what I've been super excited about over the past few years is seeing you actually realize your true calling as an artist. So today, that's where I want to go. I want to go on that journey with you because I feel like maybe you started as an artist and then, like a lot of people, probably decided I need to earn some money and, turned to a natural profession, which is graphic design. But now you've finally come back to what I believe is your true calling. So, Berny, why don't we start a little bit in the past? When did you first discover art and what drew you to it?
Really interesting question. So I grew up with a father who is actually a musician. So naturally, I was surrounded by music and playing music and that was something that I thought would be, I guess, potentially the career path that I might follow. And it wasn't till I obviously majored in sort of music for year 11 and 12. And it wasn't till the end of year 12 that I looked at, okay, what would I possibly do now? And music did not strike a chord with me at all. And so I scrambled to put a portfolio together to get into visual art degree. And so I did that, and that was, I guess, the very first sort of days of my experimentation with art and what that could possibly look like. I can't even recall where that came from. It was just something within me that was calling my name at the time. And I studied art for a year, and then, as you just mentioned, I did transfer to graphic design, majoring in photography. And I finished that degree, visual communication, and started working as a graphic designer. And I ran a studio for many, many years. And a few years back, it was just this sort of itch that I had where I needed to give myself the freedom to express who I actually was. And so that was the journey that I then embarked later in my, I guess, career, was to start that exploration again. And that was really interesting. When after many years of following client briefs, of obviously, working for other brands and creating for other brands, the journey and the process of finding who I was as an artist was really challenging because I can create in many styles. So that took, in hindsight, it wasn't that long, but it took, quite some time for me to, I guess, get to the point where I am now, of finally feeling comfortable with, I guess, what I'm producing as an artist and designer.
You've touched on there the idea of a creative brief. And for those who are unfamiliar, there's often a lot of restrictions and a very specific purpose for a graphic design outcome. So you're very restricted. And to me, one of the beautiful parts of creativity that comes to the fore in that commercial sense is how people take those restrictions or those guidelines and actually still find a means to put their own style into it and infuse it with the meaning that means so much to them. But it is very restricted to the client's needs and within the world of the client's brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've always been a designer, though, that I felt looked at layers of meaning even in graphic design. So your color selection, for instance, wasn't just about what color looked pretty or aesthetically pleasing, but thinking about how the brand's meaning linked with that color and that expression and the meaning behind those colors. What is it about those layers of meaning that's always been so important to you?
Something that I guess I learned along the way, or that really, I guess, meant something to me was, and early on in the days, I didn't think this way so much because I was adhering, obviously, to client briefs and guidelines and so forth, is that creating without meaning is just, for me, it's worthless. Like, I just don't, it doesn't fill me, it doesn't fuel me. And it's, how can you be creative when you don't know why you're doing something? For me, that's extremely important, is to really understand true meaning behind the shapes that you're using. The colors really need to resonate. Even if they're shades of a color, it changes a piece completely. And that's something that I found with my art practice in particular is, I create with very structured and very geometric and simple shapes. And I always start with monochrome, pencil coloring. And it's not till the shape is formed that I play, for example, with color and texture. And it's amazing how much the color choice changes the way that you view this particular shape or whatever it might be. It's really quite incredible, seeing the same artwork in multiple different colorways and how that affects the viewer and the feeling that you get from that. Sorry, I may have deviated, but it comes down to finding meaning in everything that you create. And I think whether it's a brief or your own work, it's extremely important because your own self comes in to the work that you create, even if you are creating for somebody else.
Before we dive further into your artwork, which I'm really excited to talk about, especially that journey and how you got to the place that you are today, AI is the hot topic that everyone's talking about, particularly AI and creativity. Do
Yes.
you think that AI can ever truly replicate creativity, or do you think you require that human lens to be able to really understand things that perhaps can't be coded?
Interesting question, that one. And it's something that I have started to really think about. AI obviously, will play a huge part in our lives. But I do feel that humans need to drive it to get the outcome that they, I guess, can visualize themselves when it comes to creating imagery. So by that, you need to drill deep and you need to use the right words to describe what you are trying to create. I think that that's extremely important, or else the outcome, I don't believe, will be that for which one might be after initially. So I do think human creativity is extremely important.
It's interesting, isn't it? I feel like the more we are subject to AI content, the less we're actually engaged by content. And so it does feel at the moment like obviously there's a great efficiency and efficacy that people can gain from, particularly if you're not a writer or you're not a graphic designer. There is that temptation there, of course, to utilize technology to, essentially fulfill the need of the thing that you're trying to create, whether that's an article or a thought leadership piece or whether that's a logo. But I just think they feel entirely different and that level of emotion is missing.
Absolutely, and I agree. One thing I think that, like, AI is, particularly in the field that I'm in, AI is great for setting the mood or I guess, the general direction of something whereby, the readers might not be able to visualize what the artist or designer is seeing as the end result. So I think, much like a mood board does, I do feel AI is great for that. But again, to your point, it definitely doesn't create that real deep sense of feeling that you need to have when you're absorbing a piece. I do think that is, for the moment, probably the missing link for me as well. Absolutely. But it serves its purpose, and I think it's definitely useful. But yeah, will it replace the human creative mind? Let's see.
I don't think it will. And I think that there's probably actually a move back to tactility as a
Yeah.
result of, when we're so removed from that emotional human connection to things. I do think that the natural urge then becomes to touch, to feel, to smell, and to really want to immerse ourselves in those kind of more tactile experiences. You were a very successful graphic designer. You had an agency that was particularly successful. You've worked with incredible clients. What made you take the leap from that very, I would imagine, accomplished and comfortable place where you'd spent many years kind of working up to a point of having that reputation for being such an incredible designer, to effectively leaping into a space that I imagine was quite bold and probably came with some risk for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, it absolutely did. I just felt that at this point in my life, I needed to actually create pieces and work that really hold true meaning for me, and where I could get my hands dirty, so to speak, with regard to, creatively playing without necessarily always having an outcome in mind, but rather, developing, finding a voice and really just giving myself permission to be creative without limits. And that is something that I was craving for quite some time, and sort of trying to, I guess, find what the best direction for me would be moving forward. But I do have this strong sense of, I guess, my place in the world and why I am here. And it certainly is to create pieces that are meaningful to me and that will be appreciated and loved in homes and spaces for many, many, many years to come. And I think I'd probably say I'd regret if I didn't make this move. And I think that this is something that has been calling my name for a while, and I've just sort of, pushed it aside.
So you started with paintings
Yes.
and you've now expanded. I think paintings are still probably very much at the core of where your art begins, but you've got beautiful textiles now. You've moved obviously into wallpapers and all kind of elements of home design. You in fact call yourself a design artist, which, has that sense of real world application of art, not just
Yes.
something that sits in a museum or sits in a frame. So tell me a little bit about that, the sense of building beautiful environments and having cohesion and that sense of kind of aesthetic
Yeah.
indulgence.
Look, it's again this process of who I am and my identity, and as you know, it has been, as a brand designer or a designer and graphic designer for many years. And when I started painting, um, I did find, or it wasn't so evident to me at the time, but upon reflection now, whenever I did embark on a painting, it was generally always with design thinking, and I would approach a painting as I would a design project, and that just came second nature to me with my experience. And I guess in with that painting, there was this itch of how do I truly bring in my design experience and my love of design into my art practice. And that is where I guess that exploration of, surface art came about, and really blending, fine art with applied arts for me is something that I absolutely love. And I do feel that is my place. It's something that I feel that, with my experience, I look differently at pattern art and fine art to a lot of the more traditional artists. And it's how my mind works. And so for me, it just was such a natural progression to go down that route. And, when I was sort of looking also just further in, on the topic of, artists who I admire, Sophie Toiper Art was somebody who actually did that in the early 20th century, which I absolutely admire. She was a painter, a designer, a dancer, and she had this interdisciplinary practice where she essentially did that. She blended the worlds of fine art and applied art, and she really challenged the hierarchy of fine art and applied art. And I guess that is absolutely what lights me up, is seeing a piece of art on an entire wall as opposed to, sticking it to a canvas. And playing with different mediums is something that I absolutely love doing.
And the colours you use, Bernie, they're very organically inspired. You certainly feel a sense of nature and, the kind of natural world the outside comes in with some of the colours. So we're talking beautiful browns and, really rich greens and gorgeous kind of ochres and things like that. Tell me about that relationship with nature and where that kind of inspiration comes from.
I always did get my inspiration from a lot of nature and obviously spending time in nature, living in the environment, as you know. And so for me, it is the grounding that nature gives me and being associated with it and really just absorbing the beauty of nature is absolutely something that is in me. And it's so, instinctively comes out. And I am drawn, obviously, to, the depth of the colours that we see around us, which I just find so beautiful. And so, I guess just naturally I'm drawn to the colours that I see and that I look at in absolute detail when I am out in nature.
The geometric shapes and the kind of structure of your art, though, also gives me a real sense of late 60s and 70s glamour to it. I feel like this could be as welcome in a Holston era or, there's a whimsy to it, but there's also that kind of geometric pattern repetition that feels very much to me like it has that kind of late 60s, early 70s aesthetic. Is that a time that inspired you? Is there something about that particular era that draws you in?
I guess indirectly, yeah, absolutely. I have always had a fascination of blending vintage with modern and having this, I guess, eclectic mix of feels in a piece. And so I love, I love anything old that tells a story. And I think that's where that comes from. Is that, and I do particularly love the 70s era. So it's interesting that you should, pick that up. I am very much drawn to patterns and shapes from those eras and even the colours and the feel that comes with that and the imperfections that come with the worn. I love anything vintage that tells a story. It really does light me up, so to speak. So I guess once again that, instinctively just comes into my work. And again, obviously my cultural heritage does come into play there very much. And, the inspiration behind my work there is really starting to show, I think, with acceptance of where I've come from. So yeah, absolutely. I have, a lot of my patterns do fit into that mid-century sort of vibe. And in fact, they are, a lot of wallpapers and fabrics have been purchased for that type of interior. So yeah, it's definitely an inspiration for me looking back.
You mentioned your culture and your history. Your parents are Croatian, and that has very much been a part of your life. And obviously, you're a first generation Croatian Australian. Tell me a little bit about how has the identity and being Croatian influenced your work, and are you seeing it kind of show up in surprising ways?
Yes. So I guess to just rewind back, I guess as, a young one and a teenager growing up in Australia, in a Croatian household, but also with German influence. So my parents actually grew up and went to school in Germany. So we very much had both of, the cultures growing up. And it was something that I guess I tried to fit into, Australian society and be an Australian kid, but I'd never really fit that bill as much as I really, really wanted to fit in. And my roots always did somehow come out. And my parents really did, they did a lot to keep the culture, in our house and surrounding us. We went to, cultural events and concerts, and I was surrounded by music, Croatian music, even German music. We'd go to the Oktoberfest, there was always, some form of this cultural heritage that crept in as much as I liked to fight it at the time. And it definitely wasn't till I was quite a bit older that I reflected back, particularly on this journey that I'm on now, to look at, who I was and those experiences that actually have shaped who I am now and what is creeping in that's, subconsciously ingrained in my skin, that's coming out in my art. And so it really, plays a huge role in identity. And I think that is something that I am striving, I guess, to extract is that sense of culture and that identity that I've come from, and actually have what I create fit into this modern context, but with the traditions, underpinning everything that I create, I find now is something that is absolutely essential with what I'm creating, and something that is absolutely who I am. So yeah, it's
a
yeah.
familiar tale, isn't it? That I relate to it myself, obviously, with my mum's Italian heritage. I think there are many first and second generation Aussie kids that come from European backgrounds who our first instinct, I guess, is to almost disassociate from it. And yet, as an adult, it's funny because it's those things that you treasure so much, and you almost want to go back in time and shake your younger self and say, can't you see how fabulous this is? This is the stuff that later in life you're going to be so thankful that you had exposure to, whether it's the cooking, the music. But it is funny, I think that it's a story that many Australian kids will relate to, is that kind of sense of you just want to blend in, and then at some point in life you decide, actually, I don't really want to blend in anymore. I actually want to be authentic, not necessarily stand out, but be true to who you are and all the various facets of that. Your art is doing incredibly well. You can purchase it in places like New York. It's in incredible hotels. I had a friend on Instagram who just happened to have your wallpapers in the background at a pub. It's out there. It's doing amazing. Would you tell your younger self to leap earlier?
If you would have asked me this question a couple of years ago, I would say yes. However, now I think that my experiences and my journey up until this point have actually really influenced who I am today. So I think that, as you know, everything happens in divine timing. And I truly believe that. I don't think I was ready years ago to actually, I guess, let this out. It just wasn't the right time. And so that is how I guess, approach my life and my work now, is that firstly, it's never too late, particularly when you are a creator of things. I think the timing for me is now. And that is absolutely what I believe, 110%. Absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about, how do you know when a piece is done? Because I think this is something that a lot of budding artists would like to get an insight on. Like, when do you know it's ready for the world? Or do you know?
This is something that I am constantly challenged by. And I, earlier on, I would push pieces way too far, thinking that they're not done. They're not done. And I tend to overcook them, so to speak. And then they never see the light of day. So something that, like, I've put into, I guess, my process, and something that works really, really well for me and allows me the time, is that I actually work on a number of pieces at one time, and, obviously paint with very fine layers. And so I'll obviously, have a body of work that I'm working on, and I'll work on a handful. I will walk away. I will spend sort of maybe a day or two away from them. I will come back. I will continue that process of, obviously working on them. I walk away. I step back. I walk away. I step back. And that is the process that I've actually adopted, for the reason that it gives the piece time to, I guess, mature in my mind. It's so incredible, actually, when you step away and come back even the next week, and you look at it with different eyes. And it's with that distance and that separation that I then feel whether it is done or it needs more work. And it's something that, for the past couple of years, I have been sort of trialing and testing. And it's absolutely the process that works for me personally, with my style of art and what I create. So it is, I'd say it's the distance and actually separating yourself from the piece that allows you then to look at it with fresh eyes. And you get it's the feeling. It's not a right or wrong. It's just that feeling of when you look at a piece and how you feel about it. And it's difficult. It's probably the hardest part for me, is, really assessing whether it needs more or whether it needs to just stay where it is.
I was interviewing another artist, and he was talking to me a little bit about, the term artist and how comfortable people feel around calling themselves an artist. How long has it taken for you to feel comfortable to call yourself an artist? And What has that journey been like?
Yes. Imposter syndrome right there. Look, it's taken me a good while to actually embody that and really to feel that I belong is probably the right way of putting it. It's taken a lot of time and internal processes that, and internal talk. I've had to change a lot about how I view myself also and who I am and what gives me the right to call me this and that. And so that's been another, process in itself, is to feel comfortable with that. And I do feel that when I looked at my practice as being a design art practice, that's when it really hit home for me. That for me is who I am, and there's no escaping that. And so from that point, when I realized that, that's when I feel like sort of really owned, my place as an artist and designer. I'm an artist designer. It's what I do.
Art is always a journey, right? It's a journey of discovery, and it's something that takes time to get to a place where you've really found your voice in art or your place in art. How do you feel when you look back on your earlier work now?
It's just part of the journey. You have to go through it. And I think it's where you learn and you grow and, you find who you are. And I'm still finding who I am. And I think I always will, because every new chapter opens up a new door and you try new things. I feel that I constantly need to be in motion of, trying new things and heading into new directions. And I feel that, look, now I do feel to a certain degree that I have found my visual language. And from this point now, and that only really happened just quite recently, I would say, where I feel really, really comfortable with my visual language, that it really truly represents who I am. And I wouldn't have got there if I didn't have the early days of experimenting. And so, moving forward, that will, the voice or the language, my language will be there, but it will take new directions and, new areas to explore. It's always exciting and it keeps you growing and it keeps things interesting and it's creative. And I love that.
What's the dream? I know dreams evolve and change, but what are the things that you would love to do, achieve?
So I do have just, I guess, a number of dreams in terms of projects that I'd like to be working on and collaborations. I'd love to be collaborating with brands to create art for the home and pieces for the home and products for the home that I call art, that are, it's applied art and it's art that people will live with every single day and use even and sit on and, all of those things. So I guess if I am to look back of, that the goals and the dreams, I'll be absolutely ecstatic if I could have a whole collection of art products, so to speak, and art for spaces that will be used.
Art's always had this kind of almost class barrier to it, right? It's something that, within art itself, obviously, there's fine arts and there's all different kinds of arts, and each has a different hierarchy if you want to apply a traditional view. And also, art knowledge is something that has been used to include or exclude over generations. People who understand art typically are part of the higher echelons of society, whereas, it's something that can also be quite exclusive. How important is it for you that art becomes more democratic?
Yeah. Look, and that's something I touched on earlier, with one of my inspirational artists that I look at. And, she precisely did that, is she really challenged that hierarchy of, fine art and applied arts. And for me, I think it's so important. And I guess it does fill me to know that, society, and no matter what your place in it is, that you have the right to absorb and to surround yourself with beautiful art and beautiful pieces. And I think that is where, obviously limited edition prints will come in. That's where wallpaper and fabric come in. It is a form of art and it is art. So for me, that's hugely important, is actually blending the two and having seen and viewed as art, because that is what they are. And if I look at, for example, my pattern designs, I only produce one colorway in each pattern for the reason that it is a piece of art to me and it is created with an intention, and the colours have been carefully selected for that particular pattern. And so for that reason, I don't produce multiple colourways. It is artwork. It is art.
How do you as an artist protect yourself in terms of IP, or is it just something you have to accept that when your art reaches a certain level of popularity and desire that there will be those that breach that and mass
Yeah,
produce?
it's really difficult. I think that firstly, I'd say it's probably an honour to actually have that happen, meaning that, it has appealed, to a wider audience. But for me, it is actually just one foot after another and keeping that creativity moving along to be the leader and I guess not the follower, so to speak. That's how I feel we need to break those barriers, is just to keep reinventing and keep creating and keep coming up with new things that, ultimately, could be copied. But there is a very big difference between, the original art form and I guess the copied versions. So I think it's just part of the landscape, unfortunately.
I think it was Banksy, and I'm going to misquote this, who said, good artists imitate, great artists steal. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, interesting question. Yeah, I've got mixed views around that. I think it's in this day and age, we are all exposed to so much, and you absorb so much visual content that it is sometimes it's really difficult to separate or to even recall where you may have seen certain things. And so I think it's just by the nature of how much we are exposed to that, sometimes it does happen that, artists produce very, very similar work or could produce very similar work. So it's something that I really sort of moving forward absolutely try to be very mindful of who's doing what. There's so much visual content out there that sometimes it's just difficult. And we are inspired by certain artists and certain designers. So sometimes it is just what we personally like or what appeals to us that can sometimes come out.
Yeah, to me, the originality always is the journey, right? It's all those layers that come together. And I think, as writers, for instance, it's very hard to write unique and original prose in a totally unique manner because you learn to write as a reader. And so that reading journey and who you're exposed to naturally infuses and influences your work consciously,
Yeah.
subconsciously, otherwise. I think we're all, if we're trying on that journey to get to great, we're all certainly imitating. I don't know that great artists necessarily steal. What do you want people to feel when they experience your work? Are you someone who puts work out into the world with a hope that it would create a certain feeling or understanding, or is it something that you want them to bring, the audience brings their own meaning to your work?
I would love for any viewer to I guess immerse themselves and to take from a piece and to feel from a piece what resonates with them and what is highlighted for them. I think that sort of always giving a narrative to a piece, it does limit it. I think art is to be interpreted how it speaks to each one of us. I think it's, something that is such a personal reaction that I love it to be unique, and I love that any one piece to have different interpretations of it. For me, that's actually quite beautiful.
This podcast obviously is very much about, the people shaping culture and influencing culture. One thing I can't help but notice at the moment is art is obviously a target of political statements, and you see a lot of protests and things that are using the destruction of art as the methodology through which to gain attention, or the attempted destruction of, obviously. Museums and galleries, thankfully, have become very good at protecting art. Why do you think that is, and how does that sit with you, that protest is happening through the destruction of creativity?
Well, I think art is absolutely a vessel for your visual story and themes and so forth. And, it always has been. So I think that, the reaction sometimes spurs up emotions within people. And that's actually what art should do, really, isn't it? When it has a theme or a message that it conveys. And so I, personally am not a fan of creating any harm to any art pieces, and I don't think that's right. But then, on the other hand, it's obviously spurred really deep emotions and feelings in people that, that in itself is quite powerful.
I think it's really interesting that they're the targets of this kind of protest because it says something to me about the emotional need to protect art that we feel as humans and therefore its relevance and importance to humans. I'm really fascinated by why art. Why is art the target? And people get very upset that art is the target.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as we should, I don't think it's fair or just that any piece that somebody has actually put their heart and soul into should be treated in that way. But as we've touched on, it does spur those heavy emotions and people's place in society. They're vessels. They are vessels for culture and traditions and hardcore messages when they're created with that intent. It shapes who we are. It shapes history. It tells important stories. It's a way of speaking without speaking.
Speaking of history, there's a lot of discussion, or has certainly been over the past few years, about how we should view art through historic art through a modern lens and where it becomes art of a different time with different values and representations. Obviously, there are some that feel that censorship is the answer, that we shouldn't see how a world was expressed or valued through particular or certain pieces of art. How do you feel about applying a modern lens to historic art and whether or not we should, put warnings up or kind of try to contextualize it? And also, how do you feel about the role of the artist in art? Is it important who has created art for the art to be understood? And should we erase art that's perhaps been created by people for whom history has not judged well?
I think creation of art, any art that's been created has been created with intention and purpose and, again, to tell a story. And I think destruction of any art form is absolutely terrible. Like, I think that despite what it might be saying or how people view it, it's still a part of art history. And I think that it would be a real shame that we look at it like that. These days, there's so much that we have to censor. And, my question is why? Like, why? I think these things, any art form that has been created was so intentional at the time, regardless of who's created it and, the artist's place in society and what they were known for. I think it all has its place. It is history. It's what's shaping the world as we know it. So I think it's extremely important to keep everything intact that was created. It's integral to our learning as well and to the human race. It's so important.
I agree. I think the answer is always teach critical thinking. Don't try to
Absolutely.
alter or erase history. Teach
Yeah,
people how to interpret and understand and apply a
absolutely.
critical lens to who created and for what purpose and why. Bernie, you've taken us today on an incredible journey from your early roots in music and obviously the things that kind of inspired you, got you into your art degree, which then we did the kind of traditional career and moved into graphic design. And now, thankfully, you've become an artist, an incredible artist in your own right. And I'll certainly be putting links up so that those can visually see what we're talking about in terms of Bernie's work. I wanted to kind of close today with, now that you're, a woman of a certain generation and you can reflect back upon those early years of your career, what advice would you give to young people today who are passionate about art, who want to see that as their career? What journey would you say go on?
I would say particularly in, today's time, the career of an artist can come in many shapes and forms. And, you don't need to follow the traditional career of a fine artist necessarily to be able to create art and to actually earn a living from it. And so I feel that if it is your calling, it's something that needs to be explored, and that creative journey is such an experience, and it creates for well-rounded humans, I would say, with really strong identities and, they're knowing their place in this world. It all comes from exploring and creating art. And so I'm an absolute advocate for saying, if this is something that's calling you, start playing and start exploring, and you will find your way.
Beautiful. Berny Bacic, thank you so much for joining us on Culture Snap. I've really enjoyed the conversation. If people want to check out your art, bernybacic.com. We'll put some links in the bios, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Kiva, for having me. Lovely to chat.